Good afternoon, Seth Morrisey. It's a pleasure to be able to interview you.
Thank you.
Kathleen Dudley, and I'm in New Mexico, and you are in Seaside, Oregon.
Correct.
Very good. So, Seth, you're a councilman on the Seaside CIty Council. I wondered if you could give just a brief background of yourself and what you do and how you managed to get into or make the choice to get into government.
Thank you, Kathleen. So I was born and raised in Seaside, aside from just a brief stint in Portland and then Ashland going to college. I've been, in Seaside my entire life. I couldn't stay away. I'm a longtime surfer, so it's hard for me to be more than a couple miles from the ocean. I've always been a business person, I guess, and more entrepreneurial. I've never liked working for people. And that started because of just my family has always had their own businesses. They never had jobs. They always started businesses and ran them. So since I was a kid, I just always was kind of ingrained in that lifestyle. And then, as I started running a business, I started realizing all the impediments that are out there to actually try to operate a business profitably. Most of which came when we owned convenience stores and all the different agencies that I had to deal with, from the DEQ to the OLCC to the health inspectors. And it was just endless. And anytime if anything went wrong in any of these different, realms and agencies that are watching over us, the entire business would be shut down. So I kind of got an idea of how government could negatively affect, positively in some ways, but also negatively affect my ability to provide for my family. So as I watched government kind of get more and more intrusive, I decided, okay, I'm going to start getting involved in politics. So I first started volunteering on the the Convention Center Commission. And then after doing that for several years, I thought there was an opening on the city council. So I decided to run. I ran against one other person and I won. That was about 5.5 years ago. And then I was reelected to a second 4-year term. First term was 2 years, second term was 4 years. And so now I have about 4 months left in my second term as a city councilor.
And how many terms can you serve?
Well, I'm not going to be running again at this point, but you can serve indefinitely, which I think is probably an issue as well. I think there definitely needs to be some limit. I would say this, after being in city government, there is a benefit to having people in there that have been there a few years, because you do learn a lot. There's a lot to learn. And if you just get in, you really have no clue. It's kind of like seeing for the first time. You have really no clue how the city operates. But I think after about 6 to 8 years, that's probably the point where there needs to be some turnover too, some new ideas and some fresh perspectives. People get pretty entrenched. So I think it needs to be a combination of people that do have some experience, but also have a point where there needs to be some term limits as well.
Okay. Well, thank you and welcome again.
Thank you.
Seth, the reason that I wanted to do this interview was because a fellow colleague told me about a letter that you had written to the Astorian newspaper expressing some of your concerns about the edicts that were coming down from the governor and affecting the decision making of individual people in Seaside, in Oregon, specifically. And you responded with a letter. And this was all about, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic emergency that occurred, 7 years ago? Feels like it, 7 months ago.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about your concerns about what is coming down in terms of the impacts from these edicts around COVID.
Yeah. I'll start from the beginning. So I'd say when I first started hearing about this virus coming out of China and potentially coming to the United States, like everyone, I was concerned, and we wanted to, be cautious and, do what's right and protect the people of the citizens of Seaside. So we did take a lot of precautions that I supported, things like limiting tourism at the time. That was the biggest one. And the governor shut down a lot of travel as well. But what we did during that period is we actually declared a state of emergency at the city level, and that gave the city manager then power to do other things that he did go forward and do, like close the beaches and other things like that in parks and waterways. So at first, being cautious and not really knowing what we were getting into, I supported some of the original things. But then as I started to move through the process, I just felt something wasn't right with it. And I got the kind of feeling that maybe a lot of the reactions that we were having were a bit of an overreaction. And so as I started to really research, I started to get more and more concerned about the actions we were taking. And I started kind of voicing my opinion internally, like you're supposed to do first, and really trying to convince people at the city level and also the city manager and other counselors to, hey, it's time to open up the beaches. It's time to let people go outside to the parks. And this was, coming into the spring, early summer, when we started to realize that this wasn't as deadly as we thought it was going to be originally. And as the predictions said that it was going to be, they said it was going to be really, really deadly. And as we started to see that not to be as deadly as we thought, I started to get very aggressive, just being like, hey, people need to be able to have fresh air. Some people don't have properties where they can get outside. We need to make sure our parks stay open so people can get outside. We need to make sure the waterways stay open so people can fish and do things they need to procure food for their families. Beaches, we have huge beaches in Seaside, and people can very safely go to the beach and be distanced and get that fresh air and do things that build their immune system. So I started really rallying to get these things open, and it got pretty heated, I could tell you, for a while, until the point where we actually, as a council, had to override the city and actually force it open. So that was I forget the exact date, but I think that was around May that we finally forced the city to open back up to a large extent.
So Seth, on the city council, there are 5 council members?
7.
There are 7. So did you have a majority of those supporting your posture on that?
Not at first, but there's a lot of wrangling that goes on behind the scenes. So everyone just thinks we just meet up once every 2 weeks and make a decision. There's a lot of phone calls and back and forth. And so there was a lot of conversations. I actually wanted things to open up a lot sooner, but I'm only 1 vote out of 7. So I forced things along until the point where the whole council, I think one council person was absent, but until the whole council got on board and we were able to open the beaches and the hotels back up.
So was that when you say that, are you saying that you finally had a majority vote, or you had to work to push the mayor to open? Or who was the decision maker at that point? Who was in control of the state of emergency for the city? Since
we went into a state of emergency, the city manager had control of pretty much everything at that point. So we as a council had to actually vote to open things up. And so I basically got to a majority. It took a while, but I just petitioning behind the scenes, I got to a majority, and then we went ahead and the mayor put it on the agenda and we got it done.
Very fine. And what would you say was the most effective educational points that you gave to your fellow council people to bring them onto your side? Because of course the educational element of this issue is critical, and we see a great division between our people. We see it in families, we see it in communities, we see it, everywhere. How did you manage? Because that in and of itself is quite stellar.
Well, for me, it's really a 2-pronged thing. Is one, I believe that people should have access to our public space, right? This is space we pay for. I don't think that government should be able to take that away, whether it's the beaches, the waterways, the parks. These are all taxpayer funded. There's a social contract that we have access to go to these spaces. And so I felt that we should have access, and I felt that we could do it safely. So that was the first piece. The second piece is anyone who studies health and beyond, the pharmaceutical version of it, but more of the naturopathic, knows that fresh air, being outside, exercising is great for the immune system. And so it was so important to me to have these spaces open so people that needed to get outside, that didn't have the ability to do it on their own private property, had a space to do it. So those were the 2 biggest reasons that I pushed hard. And that's kind of why, I guess that's the rationale I used to convince other people to do that. But what happened is as things opened up, everything was good for a while. So the economy was open. People were coming to Seaside and things were good. But then the governor actually, it took about a month, and then she started kind of trying to ratchet stuff back down. So she told us not to travel on the 4th of July. That's when the mask mandate went in, and a lot of other strange things when there was really no increase in issues. So here locally, we've had really no major community spread, no outbreaks, no hospitalizations, no deaths. If you didn't know about it, you wouldn't know it existed. And so to me, when I saw stuff starting to ratchet back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this isn't over. They're actually trying to lock down again. And so that's when I started to get even more aggressive vocally to say, hey, we haven't had an issue. We should not be locked down again. And that's when I made my statement and put out that letter.
And so you had made some really fine points. I mean, you laid it out very logically that it was really step by step. It started with a small request, lockdown for 15 days to show the spread. We complied, then lockdown intensified. It started with many of our great businesses being labeled non-essential. Next, they shut down our events at our beautiful newly remodeled convention center. Next, it was restaurants and bars that were forced to close. Next, it was schools and sporting events that could no longer operate safely and students needed to learn virtually. Next, hospitals were closed. And then churches, charities, and then the state parks lost access to trails and waterways, fishing and clamming, hunting. So where is this going, Seth?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? And what the biggest concern that I have is I don't want to see COVID-19 be the excuse for changing our entire society. So you always hear people say it's the new normal. We're never going back to normal. And I totally reject that idea, that mindset in general, that this is the excuse that we have to just change everything and it's never going away. I think the people pushing that, you should be very suspect of them, because it almost feels like this was maybe an agenda all along. This was something that was almost pre-planned in a way. I can't say that the virus was, but their response to it makes me really question the entire thing, because all this was already seemed to be set up, and then it's just never going away. Where did that talking point come from? You know, where did the new normal come from that everyone's repeating? You know, it just doesn't make sense. And so my biggest thing is to not let this become the new normal. You know, we don't need to just be stuck in our houses. We do have the ability to travel freely and go to our state parks and our waterways and out in our forests and things like that. And so that's my biggest thing, is that we just make sure that we maintain our freedom. Even when people want to take it from us, that's when we need to even exercise it more.
Well, yes. And, you know, what I find very interesting, and this is happening not just across the United States, but across Canada, around the world, that the legislatures have not passed a law in Oregon, nor in New Mexico, nor in California, nor in Oregon, you know, nor in Washington, to mandate masks, to make that a law, to mandate social distancing, to mandate any of these things. So what we're seeing by the governors and the mayors is that this is just a public relations effort. It's a suggestion. They actually do not have the legal authority behind them, because they have no power in their elected office to legislate law. And so what people seem to not understand is that these so-called, you know, PR moves, or the bullying by the governors and the mayors, are just that. They're actually unlawful acts. There's nothing legal in what they're doing. So as a city council person, when someone is not wearing a mask, for example, in Seaside, how is that handled? How do you see that handled? By police, local police, by fellow citizens? What is the general take on that in your community?
Yeah, great question. So when this first rolled out, that was my first question. How can this ever be enforced? It's not a law. It's basically just a policy. It hasn't been voted on by the legislature. It's almost like you said, a suggestion. How can our police, that are already overwhelmed with crime and things they do every day, how can they possibly enforce it? And the answer is they don't, and they can't. So there is no enforcement. It's all just a suggestion, and they're trying to get people to comply. And the way that the governor is enforcing it is she's actually basically threatening, in a way, businesses to do XYZ, whatever new mandate she has, or, you know, your liquor license will be pulled away. You won't be able to serve food because your health license will be pulled away. So she's actually kind of color of law doing it through that type of means. But as far as on the local level, there is no enforcement, because really we've been rendered obsolete at the local level because we're under a state of emergency, and we have been since the beginning of COVID-19. So we have no power to do anything really because she's overrides us with her executive orders as far as the chain of command and the power structure set up. So yeah, I mean, there's no enforcement at the local level, and there won't be any because there's no way to enforce it. It's unenforceable.
Well, and the interesting thing too is that a state of emergency, even declared by a governor or the health department, has a limited time in which it can be considered an emergency. And I believe it varies from state to state, but I believe it's a 30-day period, or in some cases it's even just a 3-day period. So this unlimited state of emergency is actually unlawful. It's actually something that has been imposed, and that it's like smoke and mirrors. So are there folks other than yourself who are pushing back at this? Because really what the mayor and what mayors and governors are asking for is total obeyance, total compliance. Otherwise there are threats, even though they hold no legal authority. So what's the general state of this town where you are? Are there people pushing back in a way that are they saying we will not comply with these unlawful edicts?
I'd say it's about 50-50. I think a lot of people just want to go along to get along because they just want to live their life and keep their head down. And then there's a lot of people who are very disgruntled by it. And I think everyone's just waiting for the right time and the right reason to push back. I don't know that we've crossed that threshold yet. I could tell you it's close, but I'll let you into a little secret of governments in general. Is what I've found is that the legislature of Oregon and other bodies, they actually like it when the governor just kind of takes over the reins and just kind of goes way above her legal authority and does things, because that lets them off the hook, because they don't want to try to pass these laws because the people will not be very happy about it. So they like that the governor just kind of takes the power and just forces it down our throat, because then they're not to blame for what's going on, and it's just one person doing it. So I think that's kind of where we're at a point where they just kind of said, hey, I don't want to be responsible for this. No one really wants to stand up. And she's just kind of doing what she wants to do.
Well, that's very astute on your part. And I think that's probably true, because she's not accessible. Whereas the city council is accessible. The individual person can go to you. They can pass you in the street. They can have conversation. And
she's not up for re-election. So she's not up this year. So there's really no recourse.
That's right. But there have been attempts at recall, both for the governor and then of course Tom Wheeler in Portland. So there's a lot of pushback by many people. Seth, as far as the bigger picture here, what's your sense of the bigger picture? Can you share what you see in all of this? Because I don't think it really is just about this COVID-19, where the cases of illness actually pale by comparison to even the last 3 years of normal flu. We're finding that the collapse of the economy and even the increase in suicide is up 600% since COVID, and we're seeing tremendous depression and problems that are occurring. So what do you think is really behind all of this, if you might?
Yeah, I mean, what you're getting at is the unintended consequences. So the unintended consequences of our policy to deal with COVID-19 have actually caused more death, more illness, more destruction than the virus itself. So that alone is something that needs to be discussed and debated. But when I say that, then I'm somehow out of line and I'm not allowed to talk about that, which is very strange, because if this was a pandemic that was so serious that, let's say it was so serious that we had to change our entire way of life, I would know someone who had it. There would be people dying in the street. We wouldn't need to have this type of reaction and this kind of manipulation of data in order to make this thing continue, right? If this was something that was so deadly, it doesn't really add up. As far as big picture, I mean, that's a great question. I think at big picture in Oregon, is I'm very concerned. You know, as a lifelong resident of Oregon, I look at the legislature, I look at our governor, I look at the mayor of Portland. I mean, I'm not very confident in Oregon right now because I don't see anyone in leadership willing to really speak the truth. I see people in leadership that just do as they're told. They're just kind of going along with things. They're not asking questions. So the big picture in Oregon is not good. I mean, you know, I don't know what to tell you about Oregon. I've seen it over the last 10 years really slide into a place that I thought was never possible, you know, being a lifelong resident of Oregon. The big picture worldwide, yeah, chaos. That's kind of what I see. I see two sides clashing at some point, whether that's a civil war or whatever that is, I don't know, but there's definitely no resolution that can be had as far as a meeting of the minds of the two political ideologies that are at work right now. I don't see them ever kind of resolving their differences and coming together like we would have done in the past in the United States.
I don't know if you've seen the YouTube event 201 back in October 2019.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Okay, because what's fascinating, everyone can YouTube it, is it actually lays out everything that has precipitated since the World Health Organization declared we had a pandemic on January 30th of 2020. And this was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was funded by Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, and a number of other well-known institutions. And it's really interesting to watch it because it is almost as if we're in the very play they created.
Yeah, so how do you explain that? I don't know. I mean,
well, I think it can be explained in the fact that that our governments are being manipulated by an elite group of people that have always manipulated. There is a defense minister, retired defense minister from the UK who said that every world event that occurs has been planned. There's nothing random. And this was in a book by Daniel Estulin called The True Story of the Bilderberg Group. And then when you start looking at who the Bilderberg Group is, the Illuminati, the Club of Rome, and the CIA and the FBI, and all of these, you know, organizations all come under the control of other powers that are over top of them. And so we begin to see that, yes, our governors and our mayors truly are puppets of a much more powerful organization. And then if we look back at history and see the fascist takeover, we look at Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution, we look at Mao's communist China, and we look at the kind of indoctrination that has happened under those rules. We look at Hitler's Nazi Germany, and we begin to see a picture unfolding before us of fascism and totalitarian government decision-making that comes down on top of us. And it's nothing new. It's just got a few different players like you and me and our families and our friends and communities.
Yeah, a little more higher tech version, I would assume too. I'll tell you one thing that I can only speak to local government because I'm not in state government and I have no plans to be in state government. But I could say at the local level, I've always been, I guess, a researcher and aware of a lot of these things that are going on. And I always, even just my local council, I always thought, the corruption went all the way to the grassroots in the cities and all this. And I would say it probably doesn't. As I've been in there, what I've realized is most of the people, even at the county level, they just really don't know. They're very educated people. They're just not educated in certain subjects that you're speaking of specifically. I would say if there's an issue, it's more of at the higher level, the state level, maybe the bigger cities. But I can tell you at the local level, people really just don't know. They think they're doing the right thing. They have the best interest of the community at heart. They just need more education.
I think I would agree with you with my experience. As a grassroots person, I worked very closely with people in my community when I lived in New Mexico prior to moving to Oregon a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And and we found that our power was within our local community,
Yeah.
and that we put people in office who had the same basic integrity and concerns about quality of life for our children and their health and their prosperity and their, you know, their legacy. And that was where we had power. We saw that our state legislators and our federal legislators were in some other realm, and that
Yeah.
they were not part of us. So the fact that you're going to stay on the local level is a really fine understanding. I'm happy to hear that. As far as as far as your local sheriffs and police, I've had some experiences with them, and they just seem like they're a really fine group of people. Do you think they'd be supportive if someone came in and said, hey, we're going to force mandated vaccines on all of the people of Seaside? What do you think would happen there? Because that's called totalitarian medicine. That's where we no longer have a choice. And some people say that is what's coming down the pike. What's your sense on that with your police?
I think you're correct. I think we have great local police, and in fact, I'm friends with a lot of them personally. I think the sheriff is great. I'm friends with a lot of Clatsop County sheriffs who are absolutely fine people and understand what's going on. I think the challenge, I mean, if you said, well, will they let someone come in and force a vaccine on everyone? Of course, the answer is no. But how good of excuse are they going to come up with in the future of why that is necessary? That's what I worry about, because government always seems to be very good, or whatever powers are controlling government, of finding an excuse or a reason that this is necessary. And so that's my concern, is that there's some excuse around the corner of why this has to be done, or we never can go back to normal, you know? And I can tell you, if it does come to that, then it's not going to be a smooth process. Let's put it that way.
Right. And do you believe that your sheriffs and your police would have the backs of the people in Seaside?
100%.
In your county? Fantastic. Okay. Excuse me. That's very good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've been watching what's going on in Australia.
I have a little bit, yeah.
Yes, so they are allowed outdoors for, I believe it's like 1 hour for exercise. Yeah. They have mandatory checkpoints. If you're out driving your car, you can go to the grocery store at certain days of the week, and only those days. And the list is forever. I mean, it's very lengthy. And some people say that is the beta test, that they're using Australia as the beta test to see just how far they can push the people into compliance. Any comments?
Well, yeah, I would say this. I can't speak for any other cities, but being born and raised in Seaside, we're a special community. We're surfers, we're loggers, we're fishermen, we're hunters, we're very territorial. And I can tell you there's a large group of people within Seaside that will always maintain our freedom.
That's fantastic. You know, when I moved from New Mexico to Seaside, it was just an intuitive hit to move. But I currently live in a county that is land-based people, with a history that is very similar, it turns out, to the Pacific Northwest in the Seaside area. So when I arrived in Seaside, I felt like I had really not left here.
Yeah.
And it was really quite delightful.
Yeah, we're very self-sufficient, and we understand what's at stake. And I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I just have a good contingent of people that I speak to, and I just know how their mindset is. And I think more people know about this than we think. They just don't understand the full picture of what's going on, but they're figuring it out quickly. So it's just a process of educating as many people as possible. And you're not going to need everybody, but you need a contingent of people. And I think we got a good contingent.
That's very good to know. That's excellent. Is there anything that you're doing at this moment to hold this awareness and build it, or are you actively participating in any way? How are things going?
Well, right now there's not a lot going on. I mean, we just finished up summer and it's just been business as usual. There's a lot of places, in California that I hear about that are still closed. And I mean, it's just not like that in Seaside. We've been at 100% occupancy since May. We've had no issue with, it's like it doesn't exist in this community. You know, it's business as usual. Now, when things start getting, you know, pushed at us from the top again, I think then you'll hear some more rumblings. But right now we're kind of almost at kind of like taking a little breather in the whole process of the COVID lockdown, it feels like. And so right now there's not a lot going on, but I think as we head into the election, I mean, what are we, about 57 days out, 56 days out, as we record this? I think as we head into the election, we're gonna have some fun again and see some fireworks, and we'll be active.
Okay. And you are under some fires around Salem. How is that impacting you in Seaside? And do you have any sense of you know, fires in Washington, fires in California, fires in Oregon? I mean, what's going on? This isn't even fire season.
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange. I've never seen so many individualized fires being set in all these different areas, and whether it's, you know, a lot of reports are coming out, this could be arson, whether it's, you know, power lines going down. I don't know for sure yet, but I can tell you Seaside has been spared for the most part. You know, we're kind of in a little bubble over here, but we do get the smoke and everything. But I think as time will tell, we'll figure out what this is all about. But it just seems there's a lot of individual fires that don't make a lot of sense to me, as opposed to when you see a normal forest fire during a fire season. You know, it's one big fire. It started here and it spread to here. This is, you know, 30 individual fires in random locations. And so that's very strange. So we're looking into it, and we'll probably have more info on that coming up.
Okay. Yeah, some reports that I'm looking at are indicating that they're definitely introduced by the nefarious powers that be.
There's definitely some people that have already been arrested that I know of for arson. I just don't know if they're connected or what's going on yet at this point.
Okay. Okay. So before we end our interview, is there anything else you'd like to say to people who would be listening that might not be on the same page, or might be, and want to do something to make a difference?
I think I'll just end it like I started. I was telling you earlier, is that I think the biggest thing is, you know, COVID, it's dangerous and it's a virus, but we can't let government use it as an excuse to change our way of life. We always have the right to maintain our freedom. We have a Bill of Rights, we have a Constitution, and no crisis can take that away from us. So that's the biggest thing, is no matter what excuse is given, we just always make sure that we maintain our freedom.
Well, thank you very much, Seth Morrisey. This is really a fine interview, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Bye-bye.